Call to order for a Watertown City Council meeting for August 21st of 2023. Please rise while our fire chaplain, Hank Rosso, leads us in prayer.
Please join me in prayer. Our Heavenly Father, you're such a good God, and we're grateful for your presence here tonight. We have hearts filled with thankfulness for this fine community we live in. God, I also thank you for each one of these men and women that are before us, members of the council and the administration, and our dear mayor, city manager, and others. We're blessed by such talent and commitment. We thank you, God, for the unity they share with the love for this fine community of ours. And we ask, oh God, for your wisdom tonight and your direction. And we pray, God, that even though we always don't all agree, we have this thing that bonds us together, and that's our love for Watertown. I thank you for the fire service, the police department, and those who keep our streets up and maintained, and the parks. We've had such a beautiful summer with such great facilities we have. And we pause for a moment to pray for those who are struggling on the West Coast with this Typhoon Hillary, and in Hawaii with this disastrous fire there. And we ask you for your blessings and mercy on those folks, oh God. We thank you for all these things, for it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Hank. God bless you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
City Manager Mack, please call the roll.
Peters?
Here.
Shetty?
Here.
Tupper?
Here.
Bueller? Here. Danforth?
Here.
Holeen?
Here.
Jurens?
Here. Quorum is established. With that, the chair will entertain action to approve the agenda for tonight. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda? Approved. Motion made by Councilman Tupper, seconded by Councilman Bueller. Any discussion on that, council? The motion is to approve the agenda. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. We are now on to open forum. If anyone is here who would like to discuss something that is not on tonight's agenda in front of the council, now is your time to do so. Yep, just come on up and please announce your name, and if you're representing yourself, just say yourself, or if you're representing a group, say that.
Bonnie Glines, I'm representing myself. In the issue of the road up Evolutions, it's the 21st Street. I've been arguing and fighting with you guys for about 10 years on. I'm just wondering if there's any decisions have been made about it.
Excuse me, Mrs. Glines. This is for public comment, so you can say your piece, but this is not an agenda item. So I can leave it to the city manager, but typically it's just to address something in front of the council, not to have interplay. It's not an agenda item. It's not a discussion item.
Okay, well, they told me I could come up and be on it because I wasn't on the agenda.
And you can. You can say anything you want right now.
Well, I'm just wondering why nothing's ever been decided in the last couple of years, well, actually about 10 years. I'm just wondering what I have to do to see what I can get done. Do I need to be put on the agenda, or what do I need to do?
City manager?
Thank you, Mayor. As it relates to 21st Street, that's a project that is not currently in the city's budget. I'm not sure that it's on the long-term plan because it technically is an assessment project. Once the adjacent property owners take out a building permit for their improvements that they want to do, then they'll be required to build the road to current standards. One option that the council could entertain, we've not brought this for your consideration, is to do a full-on assessment project where the city would front the costs and assess all of the adjacent property owners. One challenge with that is that we have to front the cost of that. So those are all discussions that we certainly can have when and if you deem appropriate. And I will defer to our Public Works Director if he has any additional information to share.
Yeah, I would say that pretty well sums it up. It's not that there hasn't been any decision made. I think the decision was that we were not, as a city, going to pursue assessing any of these gravel streets, at least not yet at this point in time. And so that's why 21st has not been acted on as far as an assessment project. Not only 21st, but there's a good handful of other gravel streets throughout town that are in the same situation. They were able to develop some years ago before we had paved street design standards that were hard, fast administered. And so the nature of where we're at now is we've got a good number of gravel streets throughout town, not just 21st Street, that need attention, need to be paved. Some have curb and gutter, some do not. And so until we as a city would decide that we wanted to move forward with assessing those, they've been treated and maintained as gravel surface roads by the Street Division of Public Works.
All right, back to you.
Well, here about probably 2 months ago, whenever it was, there was an ambulance that come down that road, and it was so bad, they had to just creep down that road to get to where they had to go. And living in a city that we shouldn't have to worry about that kind of stuff. And I was told many years ago that there was a budget to fix these gravel roads. And it was all budgeted now, and it's been quite a few years I've been fighting for this. But I don't see where our people should have to suffer because the roads are so rough they can't get down there with an ambulance. That's what I have to say.
Okay,
So, thank you.
thank you. All right, thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to bring something forward to the council? I'll close open forum, sorry. Still getting used to the new terminology here. And consent is already approved. We do have one change with, unless someone on the council objects, I would like to change one thing, which is the last item on today's agenda, actionable, well, actually, it's not even actionable, is in 12D, other business, the discussion on funding the wastewater treatment facility. We have people here from out of town, and I think we're probably paying for their time, so it probably would make some sense to be wise with the city's budget and have them not sit here through the entire council meeting. So unless the council objects, I would move that item up to presentations and reports because there's nothing actionable anyway. It's probably where it should have gone. So any objection? All right, then we will go on to discussion on funding the wastewater treatment facility and wastewater collection system improvements, project 2317. City Manager Mack.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll just give a brief introduction, and then I can turn it over to our Public Works Director and our friends in the audience with HDR. As you all are aware, 18 months ago or so, we were given authorization to move forward with about $36 million worth of improvements at the wastewater treatment facility. That was largely brought to us because of ARPA funding. We could have our grant that we got from the state matched pretty significantly if we committed the dollars that we had coming to us from ARPA into those funds. We hired a CMAR, which is Rice Lake, for that project, and they've now gone through preliminary design, and we have some firmer estimates on the cost of that project, which, surprise, surprise, have exceeded what we thought that they would, as has every project across the state as it relates to wastewater. So what we'd like to discuss tonight is where we're at with the project, additional funding that may be available to us to pursue, and the timeline for pursuing that funding and getting that work completed. So with that, I will turn it over to Heath, let him share additional information, and Delron and Mike are in the crowd as well to help answer any questions you might have.
Public Works Director Von Eye.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Manager Mack. Members of the council, yes, before you this evening is a consideration where we're looking for guidance and seeking additional funding in order to complete what we would call a long list of necessary wastewater improvements to not only the treatment facility, but also the collection system. So some time back, several months back, as Manager Mack recalled, in late '21, early '22, we pursued ARPA funding and SRF loans for an overall comprehensive wastewater improvements to the tune of just shy of $36 million. At that time, HDR had put in some preliminary estimates for that ARPA funding and those SRF funds. We've since secured a contract with a construction manager at risk. That CMAR is Rice Lake. They've been working hand in hand with HDR, our design consultants, for the last several months now, along with city staff. And as that work has progressed, Rice Lake has been able to provide real-time pricing on the work that we see as a need, as a necessity to get done on the wastewater system. The reality is that the original estimates have just about doubled in cost, like a lot of our pricing from back in that late '21, early '22 era has done. This is not anything unlike we've seen in the recent past, such as projects like the ice arena, such as our estimated costs for the new street maintenance facility, such as estimated costs for a new city hall. Those numbers have, and generally speaking, for the most part, have all pretty much doubled in cost as these last couple of years, year and a half, have unfolded. So with that being said, we've got a couple options we could pursue with the budget at hand and get as much work done as we can. What would happen in that scenario is we would have to focus a majority of our work on only the wastewater treatment facility. We would not be able to fund any of the collection system improvements, which means a lot of our lift stations that are aging and need to be upgraded and updated would not get any work done on them, along with any of the collection system piping, the sewer main that's under our streets. None of that would be able to be addressed as well. There's also some corners that would have to be cut on the facility work to stay at the current budget that we're at. And we feel that it made most sense to bring a plan forward to the council. While we do have that option of staying within the current budget, we feel that there's also another option that's very viable as well, and that would be to pursue additional funding through the state's SRF program. A little bit of a history, that original $36 million budget, about $16 million of that was in grants, and about 20 of that was in an SRF loan that we've already been approved for by the state at 2.125% for 30 years. That initial SRF loan equated to a little over $7 worth of additional charges per month on our users, and that wouldn't go into effect, I believe, until it's either 24 or 25.
Portion of it is already, but the final of 24.
24 is the final implementation of that. We have several staff here tonight too, by the way, that are assisting with this project, including the current acting wastewater superintendent, Craig Mitchell, and then Justin Peterson, the assistant city engineer, Marcy Luno, the project manager for the engineering division, and then Delron and Michael, both from HDR. So with that being said, that SRF loan that's already in place, we'd look to apply for a separate second SRF loan to complete this overall project. The tune of about $25 million is what we'd be pursuing in that SRF loan. It would have a similar impact to the rate. The projections from our consultants show a little over an $8 additional per month wastewater fee that would have to be implemented. And that would be, again, in a sequential manner in the time and year and place that the state would require based on the progression of the work and the receipt of the funds. Now, those two numbers up front, the 7 and some change and 8 and some change, that sounds like a lot. I wanted to put this into context, and our consultants could help me with these talking points later on as well. But we in the city of Watertown enjoy having the privilege of, I believe it's the second or third lowest rate in the region for wastewater service. We're at the bottom of the list when it comes to our rate structure, the actual costs that our users are paying for wastewater, which is a good place to be if you're the user of the system. It's inexpensive to be able to use wastewater here in the city of Watertown. Now, what do these rate increases do? That's the first thing we want to look at and be sensitive to, of course, within the region. If no other communities' rates are adjusted, these two changes, I believe, brought us up into the middle third of those rates. Not the highest, not the lowest as we are today, but somewhere in the middle third. But that being said, we know full well that other communities are in this exact same boat that we're in, and they're all going to be, not all, but a majority are going to be shifting their rates higher too. So we're not going to simply tick higher in the whole list of rates and where we fall, but that scale is going to shift with us, and we're likely still going to be in that bottom third when the dust settles, when everybody's done with these several hundreds of millions of dollars of wastewater work throughout the state. There are communities similar to our size, communities smaller than us, communities larger than us, all in the exact same circumstance. They've got a loaded list of projects that they applied for ARPA funding for a year and a half ago. They received that funding. Now they've gotten to a point where we're at right now with fine tuning their estimates. They're realizing those costs are coming in much higher today than they would have in late '21, early '22, and are all going to need to be addressing it in a similar fashion, and likely will proceed with something like what we're proposing tonight and pursuing additional SRF funding from the state. So with all that, I'll pause right there and stand by for any questions. And Delron and Michael from HDR are both here tonight. I don't know if you two gentlemen want to take a seat up front there, you certainly can. And Marcy and Craig and Justin and I'll stand by for any questions or discussion.
All right, thank you very much. Let's start by getting Delron and Michael's full names and titles.
Yes, I'm Delron Peters with HDR. I'm the wastewater section manager and working on this project along with Michael.
Yep, Michael Johnson, project manager with HDR.
All right, thank you very much. Any other staff want to speak on this prior? Mr. Peters, Mr. Johnson, anything you want to add before we go into our discussion?
I just say I ditto what Heath has said, and I think the city is in a great position with having the CMAR on board to get the estimates pulled together as the project progresses. In my 30 years in the business, the last 3 years have been the most difficult, and part of the reason we've moved forward with the CMAR on this project to be able to predict the path forward and not have to open bids on bid day that exceed the amount that we actually have a plan moving forward. So that's really the good of it, and certainly the design team has worked on getting a path forward for the plant that puts them in a good place for the next 20 years.
All right, thank you. Before I open it up for discussion from the council, I do have a question to ask the city manager or public works director. So this is just discussion at this point, but let's say that there is the will of the council to start pursuing this. So the request is going to be to seek out additional SRF funding to help complete the project.
Correct. If the guidance this evening is yes, we'd like to move forward, we will be bringing subsequent action at the next council meeting in September. There's some advertisement components that we'd have to take into consideration, and we'll work with First District on the application for that funding.
Thank you. I figured everyone knew that, but I figured let's make it very clear. So open it up for discussion. Councilman Danforth.
Thank you, Mayor. As I've read the item that was included in the packet, is the original estimate at 29, and now we're talking about a budgeted amount at 36? So did it go from 29 to okay, we adjusted whatever that is, and it actually ended up being 36? And that's what created the budget amount? There's the two numbers that it's not clear to me in the handout or in the inclusion that how we got from 29 to 36. That's my first question.
And I can field that, Councilman.
Yeah, let's take it.
The 29 million is the original estimated construction-only costs. The 36 was the total value of the project, which means construction costs, design, development, bidding, contractor, consultant fees, everything all in for 36. 29 was the construction only, the original construction only estimate.
Okay, so if I can, Mayor, as the gentleman's, Delron, correct?
Right, yep.
As he stated, it's been probably the most difficult time in your career, and I'm sure it is from this side of the table too, trying to figure out what costs are gonna be, because every time we ask, we get this deer in the headlight look, which I get. But how much, under a CMAR scenario here, how much fudge is being included in there on the CMAR standpoint, just to make sure they cover their costs? I mean, what would that actually be today? Because there's no way, if I'm in their shoes, and this is gonna take, what, a year, 2 years, whatever it is, there's obviously numbers in there that they are using to adjust and to add to that number. What's the real number if we were to do this today without any risk added dollars on the CMAR standpoint?
Yeah, so the estimate for additional fee, or not additional fee, additional CMAR is about 3 million we have in there for contingency. And that's built in for owner contingency and contractor contingency. It's not on the high side. It's kind
So they're-
of, we kind of picked a middle number for, they would have liked 4 million. We were right around 3 million, so we used 3 million moving forward.
So some of that traditionally is for the unknown, meaning
Correct.
you've got bad soil, something,
Absolutely.
changes, that type of thing.
Yep.
So you're saying that 3 million is all inclusive of inflation factor that they've stuck into those numbers?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Shetty.
Thank you, Mayor. Just speaking from an average homeowner, I guess, in town with not understanding, maybe being privy to all this, the time frame of this, let's say if we weren't to do this project, if someone could answer the question, what's the age of our, of the items that we're fixing, that we're updating here? If we don't do this now, are we looking at, we can go 10 more years, 5 more years? Those are questions that I would think some in the city would be, when they see these numbers, they're like, well, why are we doing this now? So if there's anyone that could maybe just give us some insight on why we're having this discussion now.
Yes, absolutely. I think Michael can talk in some of the detail and some of the improvements. He's fairly intimately familiar with them, but I'll quickly speak to some of the logic on why now rather than later. Some of it has to do with how these items overlap and intertwine with one another. It's like working on your car and you have to get into the engine to do some engine repair. Well, you're not gonna not put new valve cover gaskets on when you tear the engine down. You're gonna go ahead and do those too. So some of it just makes sense on a progression of work, that if you're gonna be here to fix A, you gotta do B and C. It makes sense to do it now. So there's some of that integration there that makes sense to do it up front. And then the other thing would be the pricing factor. We can do it now for these numbers, or do it 5-10 years from now for a lot higher numbers, presumably a lot higher numbers, but at least higher numbers in the future. But Michael maybe could touch on any of the age of the current infrastructure and the whys on why we're pursuing these, along with some of the regulatory factors that maybe come into play as well.
Right, yeah, so this project will includes improvements for a number of different processes at the plant. Some of them are due to age and condition of the existing equipment and processes. They've reached the end of their useful life, so it's time to go in and fix them up and replace them. There's other improvements, such as adding an aeration basin to get additional capacity for the plant. As the city grows, more people move to town, there's more loads and flows coming to the plant. So we need additional basins, additional capacity. So a couple different reasons for some of these improvements.
Any follow-up, Councilman?
So yeah, you mentioned it there at the end about the growth. We've grown some, the last few years as far as population. And so our current setup maybe wouldn't be able to handle another 10,000 people, or really would bog it down, I suppose. So if we foresee growth 5-10 years from now, and we wait till the final hour to try and, it could cause more issues probably than anything. So I just want to, the timing of it all too, that's part of the process too, I believe.
Yep,
So as
right.
I'm hearing correctly.
Yes,
Okay.
correct.
Thank you. Councilman Jerns?
In the world, let's try that. In the world of construction right now, in all development, when you listen in to general contractors and those in the construction industry, the demand is way higher right now than what they have labor, what they have materials. The timing to them right now is being charged extra like 10, 15%, is the numbers that I've been given recently. Will that continue? No one knows. They don't even know. Does this apply to your world? Like waiting 2 years? Are we gonna see this inflated due to the laws of supply and demand right now? There's way more projects than we have construction companies to do work.
That's a very loaded question, but certainly, we don't think it's going to get to be less money. I think that's the best way to look at it, is if we thought in 3 or 4 years, we'd fall off a bit of a ledge and labor would free up and materials would free up and we thought it would save dollars. We don't really see that happening. Pretty much our advice to really all of our clients is to get done what you can get done, because it's not going to be less later. If you need it, you need to do it.
Any follow-up, Councilman?
Yeah, are the funds, like, are there available funds? I know that some of the federal dollars were going to dry up if you didn't use them. Is there any of those deadlines involved in this?
The only looming deadline would be to submit an application for SRF funding for the October consideration. Otherwise, it'd be January.
Yeah, and we certainly have the deadline on utilizing the ARPA funds. And the state was set that up so that the ARPA funds can get spent first, so you can use your grant funds first. So as long as we get the grant funds spent by 2026, then we're in good shape there. The SRF funds can be extended to later dates.
City Manager?
Thank you, Mayor. Just another point. So when we did the initial round of funding, the way that finance is working on the rate increase is it's being phased in, so that initial rate increase doesn't come until 2024. This new rate increase wouldn't come until 2025 for residents. So it'd be phased in as we move forward with the project.
Any further discussion? On the topic of, because you said as long as the ARPA funds are spent by 2026, I guess City Manager, Public Works Director, Mr. Peters, if you had, what would the timeline be for these improvements?
Yeah, so we're actually proceeding with design and construction and getting ready to move packages out to the contractor. Certainly some to get equipment procurement this fall. And part of this is kind of to decide what we can and can't move forward with, as part of this discussion today, is to just determine how soon we can get packages out for concrete and sidewalk and piping and those type of things. So that's the benefit of CMAR, is we can get the electrical equipment and some of the process equipment procured early because of the long delivery times. And certainly the city's in a great spot for that, because the ARPA funds can be used for that up front.
City Manager Mack?
Another point to consider, much like the ice arena, so we've not set the GMP for this project yet. That's still being negotiated out, and that'll happen through the design. But you will remember we did 2 early bid packages for the ice arena, one for the steel and roofing, and one for some other things. We'd likely follow a similar process as Delron commented, that we would be bringing to you all for consideration early bid packages, likely before the GMP is actually set, so that we can make sure we have those materials on site when we need them.
Would anyone like to speak before Councilman Danforth speaks a second time? Councilman Danforth.
As we go through this, for the public's perspective, I think we got to be careful using acronyms like CMAR and the CF, CRF or whatever.
NGMP.
All these
Yeah.
things, right? The loan scenario that you're referring to, that's with the state of South Dakota?
Correct, it's the state revolving loan fund.
Okay, and so what if we don't get that?
There, I don't know how to articulate this. There really isn't an opportunity for us to not get that. It's pretty guaranteed funding, and it is backed by federal dollars.
Any follow-up, Councilman?
It's not a grant. So if we were applying for a grant, the risk would be higher that we may not receive it. But because it is a loan, a low-interest loan, it is, we don't foresee any reason why we would not be awarded the loan.
Okay. I think at some point, I think we need to talk about, and it doesn't have to be tonight, obviously, but policy in regards to what our rates are, because we have a tendency to lag behind the demand. We're not building up a reserve for what we know is going to be a known expenditure at some point in time. And I think we need to have some dollars. It's easier on the public to absorb a few dollars a month than take an $8 hit and have that that $1 or $2 a month take up many years or whatever that number is. I just think we have to take a look at some of that if we're not doing that with a restricted account as to what that's for, so that it does not have as significant of impact on the public, so.
Councilman Tupper?
Just a quick question to Mike's point, and I agree with him 100%. But is there a limit of what that would be enterprise funds correctly?
Yes, this is enterprise funds.
Is there a limit of what we can keep in enterprise funds?
I can't answer that question for you. I can check with Kristen when she gets back.
Okay.
We do have our rate model that gets updated. Is it annually or every 2 years? Annually by AE2S that shows what our rates should be year over year, and you all adopt that annually.
And that kind of adopts what our
Yeah.
excess money, whatever you'd want to say, the surplus money in our.
I don't know that necessarily dictates what restricted or like reserve account balances should be. That I couldn't tell you if those details are in there. But it does show what our rates should be to not only cover current debt, but and not necessarily future big project debt, but to allow for some growth.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Councilman Bueller.
Thanks, Mayor. Are there any possibilities, I know with the federal government's plan to help develop infrastructure, do we see any possibilities down the road? And are these SRF loans as a result of some of that?
City Manager?
So the SRF program has actually been in existence for a lot of years, dozens, 20, 30 years. They're across the country. I know we utilized them when I was working in Iowa. I think the SRF fund was probably boosted by some federal ARPA funds, which has allowed some of this additional funding to be available. But it's not a new program, and it won't necessarily go away when the ARPA dollars are no longer available. It's a revolving loan, so every time you pay it back, the interest goes back into the fund.
Follow-up, Councilman?
Thanks, Mayor. The other question I have is this will be paid then by surcharges to the, I don't know if you want to call it a surcharge, but an increase in cost in utility bills. Is that correct?
Correct, to the wastewater.
The whole thing?
Yeah, well, so the portion that we will be taking out loans for will impact the user rate. Now, the grant dollars that we got does not go into the rate impact.
Any further discussion? Okay, council, unless we have some strong opposition to this, we will bring it forward as an official agenda item. All right, thank you very much. We'll move on to Contracts and change orders. Item A is an approval of change order number 2 for the 2023 asphalt milling and overlay and large patches with Dunning Incorporated for an increase of roughly $285,000. Public Works Director Von Eye, it's your show.
Thank you, Mayor. This change order is the second one. As promised, a while back, we executed change order number 1 with Dunick on our mill and overlay and large patch project to incorporate some additional street work throughout town. This is all related to the additional $1 million of funding that staff had asked for and the council has allocated for street repairs this year. This second change order addresses some of the later adds that we were able to accomplish, the later additions. One of the primary ones that's heavily in the spotlight would be 9th Street in front of the high school. So that's in part a good chunk of this change order here before you tonight, along with some other ancillary additional work throughout town that we're able to accomplish. And with that, I'll stand by for any questions.
Thank you very much. We will open it up for council motion to approve the change order. Motion made by Councilman Bueller, seconded by Councilman Shetty. We'll open it up for questions and comments, but first I have a question for City Manager Mack. I just wanted to ask, so this is part of an extra $1 million that we are spending above and beyond our road budget, which was already like a Watertown record, was it not? Or
Close to, if
Yeah.
not a record. So the additional $1 million, and remember, this is for mill and overlay and large patching. I think that was all that was covered in the additional $1 million. I think put our budget at $4.5 million. Is that correct?
Yeah, it might be closer to 5. I think you're closer to 5 million.
But there's additional road work that has happened beyond that $5 million that comes out of different buckets.
Yes, the 5 total is what we would call or classify as street improvements that improve the overall street network's pavement condition index, the rating of the streets. So whether it be a full reconstruct or a mill and overlay or things of that nature, those are all part of that $5 million allocation.
Thank you very much. We'll open it up for discussion and questions by going to Councilman Tupper.
So this does not include the seal coating and things like that, correct?
Correct. Those are operated under a separate line item in the CIP.
Thank you.
Councilman Peters?
So you mentioned that we're at $5.5 million for the year. Just to show the public what we're currently at, and that Watertown's trying to put their best foot forward into the streets, what is the normal street budget annually?
3.5.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion, Council? Councilman Danforth.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Heath, on that number, as we've heard, there's obviously some inflation factoring that has went into play. So if we were to go back in time when we spent $3 or $3.5 million versus now at $5.5 million, what are we getting when we talk about actual roads and, you know, linear footage or whatever we want to, where are we at in today's dollars if we get this approved versus where we're at pre-inflation? Are we just staying even in actual roads to where we are then? Where's that at? Do you understand my question?
I do. Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, council member. Yes, I think our dollar is it's obviously being stretched thin now with the cost being higher. The costs for road work are no different than costs for facility work. They've also increased. I don't think they've increased to quite the magnitude that some of our structures and facility work have increased. So we're maybe getting a little more of a dollar for our road work than we are for our buildings or our facilities. I don't have a good straight line comparison for you unless Justin or Marcy has that off the top of their heads in the crowd there, and it doesn't look like they do. And some of that depends on the type of work being done. So if we were going to go and build a full new street, you know, estimates from 2 or 3 years ago, I believe were like $350 a linear foot, curb to curb, all new street construction. What that number is today, it'd be a guess, but I'm guessing 450. So it hasn't quite doubled, but it's higher than it used to be. And it doesn't completely answer your question, but I don't quite have all the data to completely answer that for you here tonight. But those are some analysis we could definitely perform outside this meeting and give you some feedback.
Any follow-up?
Yeah, I would. Thank you. And I'm just going to use general terms here. If we doubled our budget from pre-COVID, we're not really getting twice as much work done, correct?
Not quite, no.
So we're probably getting maybe 25% more work done-ish?
Maybe a little better than that, but yeah.
30%, something
Yeah.
like that?
Yeah.
So, you know, just so the public knows, we're throwing all those dollars at that, and that is difficult for us to do. Doesn't mean that we're getting 40, 50, 60, 70% more work done because of the inflation factor that we're seeing in every sector of industry. So it's something less than that, but it certainly is more than what we've been able to do in recent past, is a fair statement. Is that fair?
I would say, yeah.
All right, thank you.
Any further discussion? The motion is to approve the change order. All those in favor will please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Item B is an approval of change order number 3, final for the Watertown Area Community Foundation Downtown Plaza with Gray Construction for an increase of $8,241. Public Works Director Von Eye.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a final change order, so it's more or less a balancing of quantities and the price associated with those quantities. There's been some adds and some tracks, and the net difference here is a little over $8,000 increase on over $2.5 million project. So not significant, but again, just a balance of quantities. And I'd stand by with staff for any questions.
Chair will entertain a motion to approve the change order. Motion made by Councilman Danforth, seconded by Councilman Peters. Open it up for discussion. Council? Hearing none, the motion is to approve the change order. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Item C is an approval of a bid award for the 10th Avenue Northwest Street Extension to Dunning Incorporated in the amount of $485,676. Public Works Director Von Eye.
Thank you, Mayor. The engineer's estimate for this work was closer to $600,000, so the bids came in favorable, yet balanced. We saw a couple bids beneath the engineer's estimate, and a couple bids were above the engineer's estimate. So things look to be balanced and equitable in our favor here with this bid. This is for the 10th Avenue Northwest extension, west of Highway 20, which would lead into part of the 27 acres that the city procured in order to build, in part, to have a location for the future street maintenance facility. And this 10th Avenue extension is also keeping us compliant with our land agreement with the Dollar General, or the Rue Pelmer agency that represents Dollar General, and their development schedule in order to develop on the north side of this future 10th Avenue extension. So this is the building of that roadway, as was seen previously on our plat that was exercised here a few meetings ago. And roadway surfacing, sanitary sewer, curb and gutter, all the routine things of that nature are all included in this.
Thank you very much. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the bid award. Motion made by Councilman Schutte, seconded by Councilman Tupper. Open it up for discussion. Council? Councilman Danforth?
I'm surprised, Mayor, right? Heath, is this work to be done yet this year? Or is this going into next year?
Parts of it would commence yet this fall. The completion date is July 1st of next year. And again, a lot of that is in tandem with the agreement we have with the Rue Pelmer agency for the Dollar General site.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions, comments? Motion is to approve the bid award. All those in favor will please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. We are moving on to ordinance first readings. Item A is a first reading of an ordinance establishing the zoning designation of R1 Single Family Residential District, R2 Single Family Attached Residential, and R3 Multifamily Residential District upon annexation for the property to be known as the Lakes of Willow Creek Second Edition. Public Works Director Von Eye.
Thank you, Mayor. Brief awkward delay here as I pull up Teams so I can share my screen. Because as with any rezone or annexation, there's always good maps to share for the discussion. So this is the Lakes of Willow Creek. This is the same subdivision where the new Prairie Lakes Ice Arena is being constructed. The developer, after initiating phase one and platting those lots and building out some of the infrastructure to sustain the development for those lots, has now moved on and desires to move right into phase two and the development of phase two's infrastructure. And so this action tonight is the first reading of the zoning that would be associated with phase two of the Lakes of Willow Creek. And of course, at the second reading would also be the plat associated with this area and this zoning. With that, I will pull up the area. Should be on Teams. Check the maps here quick. So we have a general vicinity map where you have 3rd Avenue on the north side of this drawing on the upper end, and then 31st Street on the east side running north and south. This area right here is where the new ice arena is being built. And then off the map to the south here, it would be Willow Creek Drive, just for some context. Phase one is all this area to the east, and then this area that's off the map to the south that's already been annexed and zoned and platted in order to sustain that development. And then this area gets into some mixed-use zoning as indicated on the petition here tonight under first reading. They have some commercial, residential, and everything else as listed. And this is what the corresponding plat will look like. With that, Community Development Manager Hanton is here as well in the room, and her and I will stand by for any questions or discussion.
Thank you very much. This is just a first reading, so no action is required. We'll open it up for discussion and questions. Councilman Danforth?
Gosh. Heath, in the plan here, 3rd Avenue North, that abuts that property, what happens in that segment of this thing? We've had some discussion, and I think you've been brought into that loop about some concerns with 3rd Avenue as it relates to, what's that called back there?
Dakota Commons.
Dakota Commons. And then some concerns about the future once the ice arena is done and 31st out there. So what happens in a scenario like this where three sides of this thing aren't developed? What happens to 3rd Avenue? Does it just remain as is? Does the developer put in their little segment of it? How does this work?
So there are a lot of ways that could work. What staff would propose at this point would be similar to what we did with the CAC's latest development out on the southwest side of town, off the northwest, that'd be the northerly side of Pelican Lake. In that area, we collected a monetary amount from the developer for their cost share in what it would take to build out 3rd Avenue for the half a street that they'd be responsible for. And we just collected that as a lump sum cash payment for that street. The reason in the CAC's example we didn't make the developer build that road is because it's at the end of, I don't know what it is, half mile, 3/4 of a mile gravel road coming off, or excuse me, a blotter sealed township road coming off of Highway 212. It didn't make sense in that scenario to build out curb and gutter and a formal city street section just yet, but someday in the future it will make sense. I think we could apply the same logic here. Does it make sense for the developer to build out their half of this roadway when you've got gravel to the west and gravel to the east, and you'd be on an island of pavement here in the middle? So trying to think that through in a logistical way that makes sense, we felt collecting a fee at this time would accomplish that. And then at that point in the future, when the city would want to pursue building the entirety of Third in a manner that made sense, so it was all connected and paved, we would have that monetary contribution in our pockets already for this portion that this developer would otherwise have been responsible for.
Any follow-up, Councilman?
I'm not sure who this question is for. It's really, if Kristen was here, probably her. But as we collect these funds, do they go into a restricted account for this road? I mean, we had a person here tonight, which has been here before, concerned with gravel that, to the southwest of part of town. How do we know, how do we ensure that funds we collect here are going to be used for this road so that someday when we as a council or whoever's sitting on this side of the desk and it comes time to put a road in, we know we've got at least some of those funds that we have already collected for? How does that happen?
Director Von Eye?
Yeah, I could speak vaguely to that, just for my own professional opinion on it. I love that idea. I couldn't agree more that keeping it in a separate bucket of money helps track it over the years, because we don't know if it's going to be 2 years or 12 years down the road before the city goes to build Third Avenue and assess the cost back to each adjacent landowner. But by having an account with these funds set aside in it would definitely make sense in memorializing that revenue that was brought in for those efforts. I don't believe we have anything formally set up right now, but that doesn't mean that we couldn't. To my understanding, of course, through conversations with the finance officer and city manager, I'm sure we could figure something like that out if we wanted to.
Any follow-up?
I see where City Manager Mack is not here right now, but how do we make sure that we take a look at it? To me, if we're gonna collect fees on something that's very specific, and we know at some point we're gonna need it, then it should go into a restricted account that's set specifically for Third Avenue out in this area. So is somebody gonna work with Kristen to see the logic and how we do that? Because the CAX thing is the same thing. If we're gonna collect fees for a specific reason, then they should be retained in a restricted account that ensures at least that portion of the funds are available for us when that time comes.
City Manager Mack, the question that has come up is, on the north section of this development is Third Avenue, which is an unpaved gravel road. And the question is, if we are not going to ask for it to be paved or finished at the time of the development, which is possible, then we would likely take a lump sum from the developer to pay off what otherwise would be the road construction costs. And then Councilman Danforth was asking, does that money go into a restricted fund that will be devoted to Third Avenue in the future, or is it used elsewhere? And if so, why?
Well, my gut response would be that those dollars would go into the 212 fund, that they are not part of any sort of restricted, specific project fund. That's not to say that the council can't create a restricted fund like we did with the roughly $5 million that was left over from the Wellness Center bond for the ice arena. So that was put into an account specifically for the ice arena. I think the way that we've handled these in the past is that they've just gone into the 212 fund, and these road projects get built into the CIP. And when their time comes, those dollars get expended that way. I don't know what the finance office's current philosophy on restricted funds is. but it's certainly worth a conversation if that's what this body desires.
My guess is that might come up at the second reading. So, Councilman Bueller?
Thank you, Mayor. This is for Director Von. I have a couple of questions. One is, this is for a half street. Is that how I understand that?
They would, the developer would be assessed cost for their half a street section, correct?
And how do we deal with inflation with that? I mean, do we build something in, a inflationary formula of some sort?
With this method of getting a collection up front, that is the fact, that is one of the downsides to that is not knowing the year in which we would be constructing it. We're not taking an inflationary factor into account here. So that is the one downside to that option.
Any follow-up, Councilman? And Councilman Peters?
Yeah, quick question. When we decide to cost share a street, is that policy or is that a project-by-project basis on something like this?
Typically, we haven't, the only time our costs, well, let me back up. The only time the city participates in costs is because the adjacent development is not occurring. So take the land to the north here, the north half of this road is still desired to remain in the county. It's not being annexed. Nobody's wanting to develop on the north side of this road yet at this point. But if we wanted to still build this road tomorrow, the city would have to front those costs and cost share in order to get the road built like it needs to be, because nobody else is going to be at the table to help cover that expense. The south half will be covered by this current developer, but the north half would not be, so that's where the city steps in with our bucket of money to build the roads and then file assessments to recoup the costs. So in the long run, every developer ends up paying their way, and the city doesn't pay for the road, but in the short term, we pay for it to get it done. I don't know if that helps answer your question.
Councilman Beeler, is anyone like to speak before Councilman Beeler speaks a second time? Councilman Beeler.
Thank you. Director Von Ay, once again, is this something that, how soon do we have to make the assessment, the cost assessment for that road? Is it something that we can do when the development occurs, when we get right up to the point where it would be needed to give us enough time to put that infrastructure in? And again, and this is, I'm thinking about inflation again. Is that possible to do that?
Yeah, I think I'm tracking the first part of your question for sure, and the answer to that is you as a council have the luxury of setting up this requirement for third in the development agreement, which will be coming at the second reading with the plat, the second reading of the zoning along with the plat. We'll have that development agreement, and in that development agreement, it's going to stipulate anything we want to as a city regarding third. So whether there's a delayed timeline on the assessment of those costs, or whether it's an upfront requirement to write us a check the day the development agreement's approved, you as a council get to steer that language. And of course, it's got to be amicable to the developer to the degree they get to chime in on it in that respect. But yeah, the world is your oyster, Councilman.
Any follow-up?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I think that makes sense to me, that we would wait until, as close as we could get until that project develops, to set that up in the development agreement to say, hey, give us a certain amount of time prior to this development being completed, and we need to, at that time, assess the costs for development of that half street.
Director?
In that regard, I will state that I know the developer is very proactive in seeing this next phase built out to the point where they've actually jumped the gun a little bit on installing some of this public infrastructure. So while that may buy us some time, I'm not sure it will necessarily buy us as much as you were anticipating based on the fact that this developer's moving along at a pretty quick pace.
Follow-up?
Yes, one more. Director Von Eyck, have they given us any idea of how the development's going to progress? Is it going to come from the south to the north? Do we have any idea how that's going to happen?
Yes, so with this next phase, what would be expected is it would likely progress It all depends on the developer and the developments, but this one will logically progress from the south to the north. But I know they've already began some underground utility installation that's covered the whole extension of this phase. And so it's likely their road work is going to follow that same progression. They may phase it in a little bit and work from the south to the north because that's where the existing development improvements end, is in this southerly area. And so they'd likely build off of that and continue to the north from there as they desire to plat and sell lots.
Yeah, the reason I say that, Heath, is, you know, we've watched a lot of developments over the years, and something this size can take a heck of a long time. You know, and we've got a lot of developments around the city right now that are far from complete, I think.
Would anyone like to speak before Councilman Peters speaks a second time? Councilman Peters.
To Councilman Bueller's point, does the developer anticipate an end date? Have they communicated that at all?
They would have a 2-year development agreement to complete the development improvements within 2 years per city ordinance. So this phase, they're anticipating having constructed, built out, ready to go within 2 years. And they've, just to note, the first phase, I would say, was just as expansive as this one, and they are on track to complete that, those requirements within the 2-year development agreement of the first phase.
Councilman Bueller?
Thanks. One more. Another one, Heath, I guess, is when you say development, what type of development are you talking about? Infrastructure development, or are you talking about building it out? Actually selling the lots and building those properties?
Great question, great point of clarity. That's for the public infrastructure. The development agreement would apply to the water, the sewer, the streets, the storm sewer, all the public infrastructure in order to make each and every one of these lots serviceable. So they have 2 years to get that public infrastructure done, and then they can, as they get that done throughout those 2 years or within those 2 years, they can then sell those lots to builders to build on those lots and pull building permits.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Councilman Jurens.
One quick question on the 212 funds, the money that is going to be set aside, is that interest bearing? I mean, he's talking inflation.
I believe so. Yes, I couldn't tell you at the rate, though.
Well, I'm not.
Yeah, but yes, I think all of our accounts are.
The big discussion is inflation. I mean, they've
Right.
talked about doubling prices almost in, how many, just 3-4 short years?
Yes. Yeah. So we do have, where all of our accounts are housed, they do earn interest. I don't know at what rate, though.
Thank you. I guess I would have 2 comments. One, I'm not against the idea of devoting some of the money from the developer to the road. I can see why not all of it is set aside, because you don't know if there's a bigger road emergency or if there's another big project. Because like when 10th Avenue got done, that was an opportunity that we had at the time, but we had to leverage some other things to make that happen. So I can understand definitely some flexibility involved, but also it's not a terrible idea to at least set aside some of it. I'm going to step back and be a cheerleader here for a moment and just look at the bigger picture. Granted, this is just one aspect of this, but when this council and this city got behind putting an ice arena out in that area of town, it was done specifically as a pretty logical guess that if we invested our money out there, that other people would invest their money out there as well. And I do know that this is an example of a development that otherwise would not be going on without the ice arena out there. And we are looking at multi-millions of dollars of extra development coming in because the city of Watertown made an investment in itself in something that the city has said that they've wanted for decades. So this is an example of, I guess, the council, nice job. City of Watertown actually is really who deserves the credit, because we couldn't do it without the public support and the public donations. But I am just very excited, and I wanted to take a step back. And before we get caught in the weeds of the actual nuts and bolts of the development, let's just take a moment and appreciate that this is being proposed, and it is a direct result of the ice arena being put out there. So wanted to make that point. That is just a first reading, so we'll move on to item B, a first reading of ordinance amending the zoning map of the city of Watertown for the north 150 of the 550 of the south 834 of the southeast quarter of section 34 in R52 west of the 5th PM, Cottington County, South Dakota, from I-2 Heavy Industrial District to I-1 Light Industrial District. Public Works Director Von Eye.
Thank you, Mayor. Sorry for the tongue twister of a legal description on the land there. But good news is as we move forward to these kinds of projects and rezones and replatting, is we get to establish a formally platted parcel or attach it to a formally platted lot, and that'd be the case here in the future of this. So I pulled up the map, and this blue highlighted area is the one in question tonight for first reading of this rezone application. You can see it's currently zoned I-2, the dark purple shading, and is being proposed to be zoned I-1, which correlates with the adjacent zoning districts to the north and to the west. With that being said, this was recommended by the Planning Commission unanimously for approval to the council. This is first reading, so second reading would be coming at the next council meeting. I'll stand by for any questions.
Anybody from the council have any questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to C. First reading ordinance number 2317, establishing the zoning destination Sea Isle Lake District upon annexation for the property to be known as Rusink Stafferin Addition. Excuse me if I pronounce that wrong.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this, again, I'll share my screen. Before the council tonight is just the first reading for a potential rezone. The next meeting would be the second reading of the rezone and also the approval of the annexation for a parcel of land out on the west side of Lake Kempeska. And it's desired to be annexed and zoned CL, the Commercial Lake District. That's been exercised for some nominal amounts of areas around the lake. This was recommended for approval by the Planning Commission, I believe on a split vote, 5-1. Is that correct, Randy? Or was it unanimous in favor? Sorry, unanimous in favor, 5-0. And I guess with that, this is, I don't want to say just first reading, but it's just first reading, so there's no formal action tonight. But I'm sure there's some good discussion considering the CL consideration, so I'll pause at that. And I did stand corrected. It was recommended for approval by the Planning Commission by a vote 5-0. I believe the petitioners are in the audience here tonight. They can help answer any questions as well, and I'll stand by.
All right. Let's open it up for, actually, I do believe that there are people out here in the audience that have an interest in this. So I will start by asking if there is a proponent or any proponents.
Are you guys in the process of?
Actually, sorry, no comments from the floor unless you're being willing.
I respect whatever order you want to go in, but I'm willing to.
Oops.
Thank you, honey.
And just please announce yourself.
I'm JC Stoffer and Rushink. I'm one of the applicants, and we live right across the street from the said space that we're looking to rezone. And I respect whatever order you'd like to do, but otherwise, I'm happy to listen and learn from my neighbors first, and then I could answer questions afterwards too, if that's better, or if you'd rather me just be up to answer questions first, I can do that as well.
It's really more just for a first reading. I mean, I'll allow council to have questions for you if they want, but this is just to allow the public to have their say if they want to, and then when council has their deliberations, if there are questions, then I definitely invite you back.
Is it okay if we listen first to the?
I would prefer if you have something to say on behalf of
okay.
why this would be a positive thing. Because otherwise then it's allowing a rebuttal to something that you're not sure is going to be said.
Sure.
And that's not a road I want to go down in a council meeting. so-
Certainly, yeah. Well, so some of this may be repeat from the last meeting, but the space across the lake is where my husband and Colton and I got married. Our friend Chuck lived there until he passed away with his wife Janie. And for us, originally we didn't know that this would be something that we would invest in. But, I would think at night, and Colton and I would wonder that if somebody else bought it, what would happen? I think about like where we got married. We want to preserve this beautiful space. We have an arbor that's still standing of where we got married. And after some consideration with my family, and we were able to figure out maybe a potential way that we could make this work and preserve a charming space over there and then still make it fiscally sustainable. And I understand, I think, with the CL, how it can, the term has become quite a boogeyman around the lake, and I certainly understand and have and empathize with the reasons of, the fears that people have with that. And I think at the end of the day, I want many of the same things. Colton, I want many of the same things, is to keep what we see across the road to be so similar to what we see right now, and continue to improve, but yet share it with the public a bit. Where we had our special day, our hope was that maybe other people could sometimes have their special day over there. That it would be a place for potential retreats here and there, that we could, rent out some of the house that we would be making some improvements to. There is a horse stable that I trained my first horse in with our friend Chuck, and I have awesome memories there. It's really meaningful to me. We have a lot of sentimental value behind it. We were thinking that, we would like to stable a couple of our horses there, but also some of our friends who raise horses perhaps would be interested in renting that space as well. And then behind the trees, you'll see on that back end, there's a very established tree line. And what we were looking to do is, with these other things, they are commercial in nature, and our efforts are basically, if we didn't have to annex into the city, I guess, to do the things we want to do, we'd be happy doing things in the county. But that said, because it is adjacent to the city, we know that if we want to build anything, like what I'm mentioning now is in the back, we were considering building some cold storage that would be protected. A lot of people around the lake, including ourselves, could utilize a place to put docks, to put lifts, to put their boats or RVs or things like that, that is not sitting in your yard. And that's something that is of interest to us. So in order to do that, in order to build anything, our understanding is that then we'd be looking at annexation, which I completely understand. We are only here to truly abide by those things and be team players in that. But we understand with that comes just some changes and fears of the unknown, and that's kind of where our heart lies and what we see the future of this property being, a beautiful retreat space that we want to maintain.
All right, thank you.
Absolutely.
Is there anyone else who would like to testify on this item? Preferably proponents, but I can. All right, anybody opposed to this? Would you like to say something in favor back there? Just come on forward and be recognized and say your name. Yeah, up at the microphone.
My name is Melissa Muller. Eric and I live across the street from the property that they are looking to purchase. And our main concern is the CL that's in place here and how broad the spectrum is. We understand that what Colton J.C. have told us they want to do, and we are on board with their cold storage, things of that nature, but we do not like the CL zoning of it. We do not want to have a campground with 400 units behind us. We do not want to have, the list is endless. There's 15 different things on that list that can be done. Apartment complex, restaurants, hotels, motels, parking lots, all the things that when we purchased our place on the lake, we did not want. We wanted the serenity of being on the lake. So we just, we wish wanted, as in some of our neighbors and us want to see them be successful, but at the same time, we want to make sure that you guys understand the CL is such a broad spectrum and it could turn into something crazy. So anyway, that's kind of how we feel, but it's more of a fear of not necessarily Colton JC, but maybe the next owners that have it and where they can go with the CL. That's our biggest issue. The CL zoning at the lake is so broad. So, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Open it up.
That you guys are actually looking at.
Yeah, sir, you can't just comment from the audience. You have to go up to the microphone, so. And you have to say your name. If you are representing anybody other than yourself, say that, and then where you live.
No, I just live across the street at 808 North Lake. Sorry,
name
first
is?
time doing this, so.
And your name is?
Jeff Hartley.
Okay.
And I had heard that maybe you guys were looking into changing the CL, maybe, and splitting it up into some different things. Is there any truth to that?
I will allow our city manager, Mac, to comment on that.
Thank you, Mayor. Currently up for consideration in front of the Plan Commission on Thursday are amendments to the CL district. They are specifically related to permitted uses, moving a couple of the permitted uses, apartments and campgrounds, into conditional uses. And there are some proposed amendments to the definitions.
Okay. All right, yep, that's my concern is, it's obviously not what they're going to do. I like what they're going to do, but down the road in the future, it could not be in their hands. And obviously, there are many things that can be done with it, so, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hartley. Anyone else like to testify?
Point his finger at me.
Yeah, get up there, Jill.
Can't be seen together,
Keep those cameras down. My name is Jill Feist. I'm at 816 North Lake Drive. And first I'm going to read you what my husband sent me to speak to give to you since he couldn't be here tonight. The area around the lake has traditionally been protected by various ordinances to protect the character of the lake as a beautiful country setting. The looks of the buildings and structures must meet a requirement by code that requires new buildings and structures to be built to reflect a wooden, not metal, cabin structure. As an example, I tried to build a boat port, a carport, but for our boats, structure out of metal sheeting. My building permit was denied because the metal building would not represent the character of the lake properties. The property butting up to the lakefront properties in question currently meets the standards required by the City Zoning Commission to protect the integrity. If the property is to be rezoned commercially, it would allow for commercialization of the area and compromise the city's intent to maintain the rural integrity. The current intent of the prospective owner should be public information. Also, as soon as a change in the zoning, the value of the property will change to the buyer's advantage to go from residential to commercial, and the value of the property will increase exponentially. The property could be sold to another entity that may have a bigger commercial interest or intent. And while this is just a first reading, we really plead for a no on this. And from earlier discussion from a different thing with the water waste treatment. We live in 816. I could not even begin to tell you the number of times that the waste department, there's a lift station at 818 next door to us. Could not tell you how many times they have been out there working on that lift station. And I believe this would be involved in that too. And I could not imagine the additional pressure it would put on that lift station that may or may not get worked on in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further testimony?
Doug Monica, I live right across the street, and my one question I think has been answered, whether this is a permitted or conditional zoning, and it sounds like it's going to be conditional. That means we could have in the future, if somebody buys the property, they could put in a car wash, motel, an auto parking lot, storage units, office buildings, bars, right across the street from all our neighbors. And that's if it's sold. Now, there's two other questions involved. One is if it is annexed into the city, you have a gravel road, and you're going to have to fight that issue that you were talking about another gravel road to pave at $450 a linear foot. So just be aware of that, because there's a gravel road that runs next to the property. Well, it's not up there, okay? Number two, if it's annexed in the city, another question is, can you have horses in the city limits? Somebody was going to check on that at the planning and zoning. They were going to check and see if that's legal. I don't think horses can be in the city limits. So that's going to be a problem. What we would suggest is instead of a commercial is a PUD, which is a planned unit development. Now, if you go to CL, anybody that buys that property, that's permanent. That means they can put in any of these things. But if you have a PUD, I'll call it, a planned unit development, you can limit what can be used and what can't be used, and that is permanent. And a PUD, then, you could say, well, we'll allow horses. That can be put in there. So I would suggest that, you would consider that, because that's an alternative that would work for all of the neighbors. We'd be satisfied with that, and it would work for the people that are doing this. Now, it doesn't have to be commercially lake zoned. Do you have any questions on that?
Not yet. I'll take all testimony first. I wrote down your question regarding the gravel road and the horses, and we'll get to those after I take all testimony.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, if I could at that time in the future, make some points of clarity on permitted versus conditional uses. I think that'd be beneficial for the discussion.
Yes. Okay, any further testimony? All right, we'll go back to last chance. Anyone? Okay. Director Von Eye, or whoever else you would like to pass that off to. Let's go first in the order of Mr. Modica's questions. So the gravel road has been, or gravel roads in general have been discussed tonight. Tell us about what the ramifications are for the city regarding this gravel road.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Thank you for that question. It's similar, of course, to one we just fielded a little bit ago regarding 3rd Avenue on the east side of town. This particular gravel road that is in question would be on the north side of this area being annexed. So we would annex to the center line of that roadway, similar to what we do on most other annexations. What we would request in this scenario is that the petitioner complete a waiver of right to protest. And I'll explain the logic behind that. Rather than collecting a fee in lieu of constructing the road or actually physically building the road now today, this particular location, it seems all the further out in our long-range plan that this gravel road would need, or we'd want it to be paved and built to an urban city street section. So from a staff standpoint, it made sense that the petitioners sign a waiver of right to protest, which means that in the date in the future when the city did deem appropriate to build that road out, that we'd have a document on file that's filed against the property at the courthouse that waives that owner's right to protest any assessment of those costs, meaning we could do a clean assessment of the adjacent property owners when we build the road out and collect the money from them at that point in time when the road is built. That's the direction staff is proposing to take in this particular case, is a waiver of right to protest and assessment in the future.
And regarding horses?
Regarding horses, Ms. Hanton and I looked into that request as well. Two different responses. One could deem it being a, I'm going to forget the term now, I'll go to the second one, and maybe Brandy will telepathically try to recall what I'm trying to think of. The second option is looking at the permitted uses today. Once this becomes CL, we as staff would interpret that the use of horses as part of a recreational use would meet that definition. If you look at the definition of recreational use as it's included in the permitted uses of a CL, we could see that their anticipated use of horses would fall under that recreational use definition and be okay that way. Yeah, a service establishment also gives leeway in that definition for the use of horses as well. The other term I was thinking of was non-conforming.
Community Development Manager, do you just want to come up and tell us all? Community Development Manager Hanton.
Thank you. Legal nonconforming.
That's the term. Legal nonconforming is another term that gets used a lot as things are annexed. Grandfather is another term that we don't quite like to use as an analogy, but it's a term that's also one that people can relate with. But a legal nonconforming use is one that would be existing at the time of annexation and zoning that we would allow to continue. But in this case, because of the permitted use definitions, I don't think we need to exercise a legal nonconforming use. It would fall under the permitted recreational use.
All right, thank you. Sorry about that. The telepathy just, like the air conditioning, just wasn't working in this room. So,
No, I thought that he was thinking the second use that we were talking about, but then as I was walking up, we got there.
And Director Von Eye, you wanted to discuss permitted versus conditional.
Yes, I will pull those up and actually share that page from the zoning ordinance. So this is out of Chapter 21, the zoning ordinance for the city of Watertown. Chapter 21.29 is the CL, Commercial Lake District. Now, when anything is zoned, there's generally two categories of uses that the landowners can do on their property. One is the permitted uses. These are the ones that on day one, they can just show up and do these things after they get the appropriate building permits if needed for those uses. So on the CL district, there are 9 permitted uses. They don't need permission to do these. They just need to build the appropriate infrastructure to sustain these kinds of uses. The second category that these uses fall into are conditional uses. These are the ones they need special permission from the Board of Adjustment in order to carry out. So if this land is annexed and if it is zoned CL, the owners of that land can do all these things without further permission from any board. They do have to, again, check a lot of boxes off building permits, grading permits, wetland preservation, EPA, Corps of Engineers requirements when it comes to wetland preservation. But otherwise, they don't need any other board approval to do these uses. The conditional uses, if they had interest in any of these, they have to go to the Board of Adjustment, who is an arm of our Planning Commission, and the Board of Adjustment decides, based on their application, whether any of these uses could occur. And that would be the case for the current present-day owners or any future owners if this were to be zoned CL.
And then the proposed amendment that will be debated on Thursday does what to those uses?
Yes, generally speaking, we've pulled campground and apartments out of permitted uses and tucked them down here under conditional uses. We've also clarified the definition of those items, along with clarifying some definitions of what a service establishment is, and things of that nature, so that they are more lake-minded, if you will. We don't want, as an example, an auto repair shop being a service establishment on the lake, but a marine repair shop, so you can get your jet ski or your boat fixed, may be an appropriate service establishment. So there's a little bit of clarity in some of the definitions, along with pulling apartments and campgrounds out of permitted and into conditional, meaning, of course, they then would need approval by the Board of Adjustment before that use could occur.
City Manager Mack, do you have something to add?
I think we also pulled storage shops out, my error earlier, and put those into conditional uses.
Correct. Sorry, I neglected to list that one.
So the proposed amendment going forward to the Plan Commission on Thursday and then subsequently to the City Council would be more restrictive than what we're seeing here, just in general. JC, before I go, actually, let's just see if the council has any questions. Open it up for questions, council. Councilman Jurgens?
8 years ago, I sat in your spot trying to get an apartment building built in Watertown. And it was interesting. You kind of come in and you just have not been here before. And it's not real easy because a lot of opposition showed up that night. And we ended up doing some ordinance change to get what was needed for some things in town, and it worked out real good. Did we have a 1 week delay? Did we have a 2 week delay? Yeah, we did. The comments that I've received from, and the emails that I've received from the public have been fairly well received with your plans. And so, I mean, there's not a lot of public sentiment against what you're doing. What we have had discussions on is, you know, the nature of being able to flip properties is well known in all the whole country, and that's where the issues have a chance to begin blowing up. And we don't expect you to do that, nor do you probably have plans to do that, but life changes quick. Life changes quick. Economics changes quick. Things that are out of our hands can change what happens. So I am more enthused now after hearing some of these changes that they've been alluding to, and to see some of that language and to see things in black and white, because as the ordinance stands right now, I'm really not a big fan of it.
Yeah.
The CL. So.
I certainly understand, and I'm in agreement that, you know, when things are too broad, it makes the uncertainty of the public and neighbors, it'll frighten them so much more, and it would frighten me too. And I understand that, and I've seen, like, as the city has seen, there's been some problematic parts of that, and I understand why it's being addressed now. The things that would be adjusted outside of, like, I guess, the storage shops being behind the trees, which then we'd apply for conditional use, if I'm understanding correctly, which our goal is for that to be behind those trees so it's not seen by us or any of the neighbors. You want it to be like it's not there, kind of just like a little meadow that nobody secret, you know, and that's the goal. But I would agree with those things if they were changed. And I do understand that life changes, and our goal is for this to be a legacy property. It's so much more. My husband and I actually do have some rental units that we own in town, and for those are investment properties to us. We get that, you know, and this is so much more to us than that. This is like a sentimental place where we got married, and so much of our motivation behind this is to make this our dream because we want to preserve that. And I still empathize with the fear of, but you know, things happen. And if there's a way we can mitigate it, I get that. You know, up on the front part of this, we understood that you apply for CL, and then if that's denied, then you come back for a PUD. And there's part of me that yes, we are fine limiting some of these things out through nuance or like I don't know if there's a better word, but like technicality. We don't want to be too painted into a corner to make something not, you know, work, but still maintain that fact that anything we did would be incredibly charming. So I understand that. And we had talked, Brandy and I had talked today, and I know that it would, like, our goal is to not delay this, and it's not the council's issue. I think what we've experienced is this, our purchase is contingent on zoning. I know that the people who we're buying it from are very eager to close it, and we really want this to go through so that we can maintain it how we want to. I don't know that they'd be open to a longer thing, but that's also not something that you need to consider, and I understand that. I think where we're at is that we understand that even if it went through and we were able to move forward, and hopefully if things passed on Thursday, correct? that this is this next meeting about this, that would maybe alleviate some of the fears. But my understanding is before we would ever consider selling two, we could come back, and you always have the option to rezone, correct?
I will allow our city manager to, there's a few things like, just because your CL, let's say a CL zoning request was requested but denied, doesn't automatically mean it just kicks it down to a PUD.
No, not at all. No.
But I'll let City Manager Mack discuss more of your points.
Yeah, so that's exactly right, Mayor. From a timeline perspective, so the Plan Commission will take up the proposed amendments on Thursday, and they will make a recommendation to the council.
Absolutely.
Either, yes, we think you should adopt these, or no, we don't think you should. And that has to go through 2 readings, just like a zoning ordinance does. So the first reading, excuse me, of those amendments before the council would happen on September 5th. And then the second reading, either approval or denial of those would happen on September 18th. So one thing that we have kind of kicked around internally is perhaps for your particular request, we delay the second reading to coincide with the council's second reading of the ordinance amendments. And that way, if this were approved, you would know clearly what's permitted and what's conditional. But that's up to this body to decide that.
Yeah.
And, sorry, what could happen during the course of the conversation with council, especially as we talk about these definitions, is there could be a desire to continue to amend the definitions, which would kick things back. But right now, that's the time frame for consideration.
Okay, that makes sense. And yeah, I guess we can wait until Thursday to see. We had talked with Brandy today about, it's almost like a converse of a PUD is like a conditional overlay, which I think is essentially what Thursday will help, but to cherry pick out some things that would be so like super unideal for the neighborhood, to be able to almost like do those things and make sure that there's not like logistics that would prevent us from doing like, I don't know, like if a thing, but now these things are coming out, I think that would make sense, so.
Just another point of clarification, just for the public that's listening. So, conditional use does require an additional set of eyes looking at it, an additional set of approvals, but it also gives the Board of Adjustment the opportunity to place conditions on approving that. So, apartment buildings, for example, they could say you can't build it over so many feet. It can only be, this many units.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Which, in a sense, is a little bit like a PUD, but a little bit broader.
Yeah.
So.
Councilman Jurens, any follow-up?
I'm good.
Councilman Beeler.
Thank you, CJ, if I could. Just I have a couple of comments and then a question.
Sure.
I want to make a statement first. One of the reasons that we've reconsidered our CL is this is one of the reasons we're doing it.
Yeah.
These things keep coming to us, and that's why this is important to make these changes moving forward, or we're going to continue to have these issues. I do have this question, and I'm not sure who to ask this to, but if we do make a change to the CL district, would the Planning Commission then have to reconsider and vote again on that request? Because we're not passing it here at the council level, so that's just a question I have. Anyone?
City Manager Mack?
I'll defer to Heath and Brandy for the technical answer, but no, I don't believe they would have to go back through the Plan Commission with their application, because we're not all we're changing is permitted uses versus conditional uses. Now, they may have to change their own plans, if they were wanting to do something that was permitted that now gets moved into conditional, that might change how they move forward with their project, but they wouldn't have to send their application back through. I think I'm correct on that.
You might be. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Clear as mud. We're excited.
Question also, this is also for you, CJ. would you consider a PUD at this point? I mean, I know that would probably cause a little more, or cost a little more time, but is that something would consider?
I think, I mean, if we had started out and we had more clarification on making sure that we have still enough flexibility to do what we'd like to maybe potentially do and think of all the avenues we might go down to. Like I was talking with a neighbor the other day and I was like, there's potentially I go back and get my, complete my psychology license and I start doing equine therapy. And I want to make sure like all these different things wouldn't be kicked out of it with a PUD if we don't state specifically all those little nuanced things versus with if there's a conditional overlay situation, it's more so ensuring that things like gas stations, I know those are conditional, I suppose, but like certain things would be pushed out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't think we get that far in the weeds with
Okay.
this. I think it's more of the development itself.
Sure.
Permitted uses in that regard, but.
And I think we're at present, we are more so against probably just the respect of who we're buying it from and their timeline.
Yeah, it would kind of just depend on what our new timeline would look like if we have to start back at square one, all over again. I think it'd be putting a lot of stress on the sellers. I mean, they wanted to move far, far before this, and we were lucky enough to kind of keep them going and keep them in, with this purchase, so.
I would say, just please introduce yourself.
Yes.
Colt Rushink, I'm the petitioner for the annexation.
And it is JC, right?
Yes, yep. I'll answer to both. I will answer to both.
I didn't call you Bill or anything.
Right.
But sorry about that. Also, for the public's, I guess, for the public to understand, we cover this many, many times. And that is the fact that when we do these things, we have to look at all the permitted uses when we make these zoning changes or permitted zoning applications. And so you may have the greatest intentions in the world, and you probably do, and God bless you. But down the road, many years from now, this could be another issue, which could affect those residents on that lake not so favorably. So that we have to be really careful with how we do this.
Certainly.
As much as we'd like to help people out, and I feel for you, but that PUD may be a consideration for you.
Colt, did you have anything to add?
So after the decision on Thursday, would we have to take any action tonight in order to push our second reading to that September 18th date so that it all kind of line up and then that would mitigate hopefully some of these concerns that we have?
City Manager Matt could answer it, but we could also just change the date.
I think they can just direct staff to.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we'll
Okay.
have to
And that would
notice
be-
it appropriately.
Yeah.
And City Manager Mack and I did discuss just real quick,
Okay.
just to make sure that could happen, and it certainly can.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Because I think that the conversation might change at least a little bit if this were to be brought forward before the amendments were brought forward.
Yeah.
Because the concerns being addressed about the apartments, the
Campground.
the auto repair place, that would at least be put into conditional and therefore much more restricted possibility.
Certainly.
So. Councilman Tupper.
I'm going backwards. Back to the road, Heath. Right to protest, I would go with, waive right to protest would go with, let's say they were to sell it 5 years down the road. That would be just like an easement. It would stay with the property.
Correct. They get filed with the land and be applicable to any subsequent landowners.
Thank you.
Councilman Danforth.
Thank you, Mayor. Like Councilman Bueller, I've got a number of questions if I can. First of all, I'd like to understand whose decision it is to determine that horses is recreational. I think that's going to be a big issue. And the reason why I say that is we have had a longstanding understanding within our ordinance requirements you can't have horses in town. As far as for personal use. And if we're going to allow it for recreational, I really got to wonder why we wouldn't allow it for personal use. It seems like something that's contrary. But so I wonder who's making that decision. During the CL zoning request for the Mansell addition on the south side of the lake, there was a lot of discussion in regards to the slough, that's Toby Slough, and water retention, water clarity, that whole thing. This property has some significant slough coverage on that. Does anybody know if this is a protected area, or is it fair game, open to whatever somebody wants to do to it?
Director Von Eye?
Yes, this is what's known as a jurisdictional wetland. It's on the wetland maps that we have on file, and therefore would be restricted to what can happen in that area based on Corps of Engineer approval. And to expand on that, any low-lying area similar to the Mansell's that wasn't necessarily jurisdictional at the time, the city would request that a wetland determination be performed on that land before we would let them proceed with any kind of development work in a low-lying or wetland area. So whether it's on the current jurisdictional map or not, restrictions still apply, is what I wanted to emphasize there.
So there are, at least today, there's a larger degree of control.
Correct.
Than there would have been on the Mansell, although you're saying we basically apply the same rules.
Yeah, I would say the Mansell's would have eventually had the same level of regulation.
Okay, because that's, as we heard, and rightfully so, and I'm surprised we haven't had opposition here for this reason, or at least those that have expressed concern, because I have heard from a couple of people, and that is the water retention area, you know, from a flooding standpoint, and also for water clarity with the, you know, what do you want to call it, the filtering that the sloughs do, so.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is true or not, but back when I was on the Plan Commission, there was a edict that said that we will not develop on the north side of the lake, along North Lake Drive, and along the west side of the lake. And the reason for that was because of the utilities that were there, that water pressures were low. I do believe one of the biggest ones was the sanitary sewer capacity and lift station capacity. Is that no longer an issue? And if it isn't, what did we do to fix that? Because we've got a long-standing understanding that there are issues there, and we frown upon development in those areas for those reasons.
Yes, Councilman, I've heard the same talking points in my 5 years here, but never have seen anything that have substantiated those talking points. So I'm not sure how they originated. You know, as far as a water distribution study, I know that this annexation was checked off against Watertown Municipal Utilities, and they did not have any objection to potentially serving this area, but there was also some determination yet whether it would be served by municipal utilities or one of the rural water agencies. Again, that's outside of our purview because it lands under WMU's, Watertown Municipal Utilities purview, as far as the water is concerned. As far as the wastewater is concerned, again, we have a recent sanitary sewer model that does not show we should be prohibiting any development in these areas. It shows that there are some limitations to what can occur in certain areas in town. But this particular area, we do not have any objections with the capacity of the sewer system to take on development in this area.
Okay. So question I have is, when for this couple, the stake in the ground onto the ordinance language, is that what is in place at the time that they request the rezoning? Or is it, in our case now, because there's a review taking place and these are overlapping, does their request, is it subject to the revised orders? Where does this process put the stake in the ground for them?
I think that my take on that is, and I defer to the city manager, and then her and I can collaborate with the city attorney to verify. My take on that, though, would be that the ordinance that's in place at the time of their final approval at the second reading is what they would have to abide by. So if the ordinance amendments for the CL district come through from the Planning Commission to the council, and they're passed on that second reading. And then this action on their second reading took place after that. I would say that what was adopted that night is what they would fall under as far as regulations go. But again, we could run that through the city attorney just to verify, but that'd be my interpretation of how that would work.
City Manager Mack, did you want to add anything to that?
I would concur, and we can verify with Lisa.
And I would just ditto that as well. We would 100% verify with our city attorney, Carrico, before final consideration. Continue.
The good Lord forbid that the revised ordinance get delayed, and their request comes to the council for approval prior to approval of any ordinance language revisions. Now what?
That would be up to the board's decision and the applicant's desires whether to proceed or not. It really,
I mean, if it's possible, we are in favor of, being able to wait till that was considered and through. Because the things that are being talked about being changed to conditional uses, we would not affect what we want to do, and we'd be completely in favor of that. So for us, it's not something that we're like, no, we want to push our through before. Like, it's not, like we truly want to work with our neighbors. We love our neighbors. We consider them friends. We want this to be something that they also get to enjoy with us, So that's how we feel.
City Manager Mack?
Yeah, I mean, I would just comment that should the amendments get delayed for whatever reason, they can choose to have their hearing held prior to that you all can make the appropriate decision that you deem necessary, or they can communicate to us that they are fine waiting until after any amendments are approved, and we could just coordinate appropriately, because we do have to make sure that we're advertising or publicly noticing whenever
Certainly.
action is happening
Certainly.
appropriately.
Councilman Danforth, the floor is still yours.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. I just got a couple of comments here based on some things that I've heard here now tonight. It is important, I'm not aware of it anyway, that the city has a responsibility, or that it's even our agenda to try to maintain a country environment around the lake. I've never heard that. That really is not our role. Our role is to manage development. So I'm not aware that one of our charters has been to maintain that country environment. So I just want to make that understood. Also, I heard somebody say that it's possible that somebody buys this land and they turn it and they make a profit, or the value is higher. That isn't anything that we can consider. That's not our responsibility. If somebody buys it and sells it for more, or develops it and sells it for more, that's called the free market. That is, we do not have a responsibility or role in that. If that's what ultimately happens, that's what happens. Our job is to try to best manage development. Okay?
Thank you, Councilman. I have a question on that as well. I was curious. Mrs. Feist, I believe it was you who made that comment in a letter from your husband, I think it was. Was that specified anywhere? About the country environment?
We were denied putting up a boat port because it was.
Yeah,
we
can
could,
we get you a
I could get
microphone?
out totally
Sorry.
out of the way, or I could
Yeah.
carry it. Does this move? No, okay.
I've got one.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
Because the plan we turned in was metal.
Okay.
We were denied. They said if
And-
it was wood and fit in with the character of the area,
And
then
that
it
was a
would not be a
boat port.
problem.
What year would that have been?
That would have been about 5 years ago.
Okay. I do remember there was a lot going on with boat ports about 5 years ago in this town too, so.
Oh, and there's a lot of metal building, there's a lot of them around the lake. But I guess they were grandfathered in before we wanted to do ours. I don't know, but we were not allowed to do it.
And I hesitate saying much because I'm definitely no expert on this, but I do know that there was a lot that existed like 100 years ago, and those are still allowed, but any new boat ports are basically not being allowed to be built. But I definitely am open to being corrected on that. But So it might have not have been just the country environment, but we can look into that. Councilman Tupper?
Just to clarify from City Manager's Mac's comment, so if they, on the vote, if they wanted to delay their second reading, they could do that? Is that basically what you were saying earlier?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Beeler, you had something?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This, I think, goes to City Manager Mack. I think, we talked about the changes that might occur with the CL zoning coming up shortly. If they're looking for a conditional use, if that conditional use is not up to be changed, it really doesn't make any difference, does it? I mean, it's not going to make...
You mean if it's not part of the proposed amendments, is that right?
Right.
Is that what you're asking?
Yep.
Yeah, you're correct.
Yeah, thanks.
Any further discussion, council? Discussion or questions? All right. Just to clarify for everyone, the next step is going to be the proposed amendments to the CL or commercial lake zoning is going to be heard in front of the Plan Commission this Thursday. And whether they approve it or deny it, actually, if it's denied, does it actually come back to the council? It will.
Yes, it's a recommended denial, which means that a supermajority of the council would have to vote in favor to overturn that recommendation.
So it'll be heard in front of the Plan Commission this Thursday, and then it will likely be heard in front of the City Council on September 5th. And then we will hear the first reading of the proposed amendment changes to the commercial lake zoning. And then we will not be taking up this request for rezoning at that point. We will push it back definitely at least to the 18th.
If that's what the applicants want.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to push it forward, we can have it.
No, I think our best option is just to wait till the 18th.
Versus starting over and risking them not wanting to move forward with the project. So that would be, I think, our best option, yeah.
So that's the time frame going forward. Any further last comments? All right, we'll close that, move on to public hearings and second readings. We have item A, an application for a transfer of a retail malt beverage and South Dakota farm wine license and video lottery license from Lake Stop LLC, doing business as the Lake Stop, to the Lake Stop TNT operations. We will go to our city manager, Mac, for more information.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a transfer of a retail on-off sale malt beverage and South Dakota wine license with video lottery. The applicant, to the best of our knowledge, is unable to be here this evening, but they intend to serve malt beverage and South Dakota farm wine on the premises in the bar casino portion of this building. As the prior owner had done, they plan to add selling of malt beverages and farm wine for off-premise consumption in the convenience store portion of the building. Community Development has checked off that this is an allowable use, and everything else has been submitted appropriately. I'll stand by for any questions.
I'll open up a public hearing. Is there anyone who would like to testify on this item? It's just public hearing right now. I'll close the public hearing, open it up for council action. Do I have a motion to approve? Motion made by Councilman Tupper, seconded by Councilman Peters. Open it up for discussion. Councilman Jurens.
Travis Cantwell, he did reach out to me today. He wanted to be here in case there was questions, but he didn't want it to look like he was just dropping the ball on it. He had to get out of town tonight. So if there was any discussion, he would have been available.
Thank you. Any further discussion, comments, council? Motion is to approve the transfer. All those in favor will please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. On to other business. Item A, an approval of resolution on the plat of the reserve at Prairie Winds First Addition to the municipality of Watertown. Public Works Director Von Eye.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a fairly routine plat application here. It was recommended for approval unanimously by the Planning Commission. And looks, we're dealing with this area, I should say, for context, south side of the lake off South Lake Drive near the golf course. There are some storage shops, storage units being built in this area, and they're wishing to plat them in a townhouse-style configuration, which meets all the zoning regulations associated with a plat. And so the plat's before the council tonight for its sole and final consideration. With that, I'll stand by for any questions.
All right, thank you very much. Chair will entertain a motion to approve the resolution. Motion made by Councilman Shudy, seconded by Councilman Bueller. Open it up for discussion. Councilman Danforth?
Is this, I know there's a number of these already built. Are these additional ones? I'm assuming.
Let me defer to Community Development Manager Hanton, see if she has a better handle on the status of the project.
Yes, thank you, Heath. So these are actually already constructed. They are the 4 townhouses along hole 10 of Prairie Winds Golf Course. And I believe it's hole 10 anyway. And then so we
Hole 11,
wait.
but
11.
Oh, it's 11. Yeah. It would be, so we have to wait until the structure is actually built before you would do a condo plat. So you're making sure that your walls are surveyed correctly of where it was actually built.
Follow-up, Councilman?
Yeah. Ms. Hanton, a couple questions on this. When I tee off on hole number 11, my backswing almost hits these condos, especially the one farthest to the right. And I say that facetiously. It's literally so close. Was there an agreement that allowed them, well, let me ask it this way. Does it conform to all of the setbacks?
Yes.
It does. Second question is, they have those massive concrete block wall pieces. At what point are they required to put railing on that because of the height of that above the water drainage area below them?
So if it's over 4 feet, that's when they need railing. And I don't believe it exceeds that. But we can check, because we have not issued a certificate of occupancy for this building permit yet.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions being asked on that, and it'd be just good to have the right information, if you would, on that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion, comments?
Mr. Mayor.
Director Von Eye?
Brandy, any development agreement considerations for this plat?
Yeah, and so that's another reason why a condo plat is usually administratively approved, but because there are improvements that are being done to 54th Street, so there are public improvements, that is tied to the building permit because 54th Street has already been platted, but the development agreement was never memorialized for who was going to improve it. So that's why to issue a building permit, we need to make sure that the street is being constructed to our city standards. And so that was tied to the building permit, but it's not being platted because it already has been platted previously. So kind of a unique scenario here.
And thank you. Any further discussion? Questions? Motion is to approve the resolution. All those in favor will say aye. Opposed say nay, and we'll call the roll.
Peters.
Aye.
Shudy.
Aye.
Tupper. Bueller. Danforth.
Aye.
Holleen.
Aye.
Jurens.
Aye.
Motion carries. Item B is an approval of the resolution of acceptance for subdivision improvements for the CAX First Edition subdivision installed by the developer, CAX Lakeside Edition Incorporated. Public Works Director Von Eye, please tell us more.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This, believe it or not, brings some joy to the staff in bringing this forward. It's not too often we get to see the completion of a subdivision from start to finish, and this is one of those that we worked diligently with the developer on, and they've responded well in completing the development improvements. As you recall, similar to the last action, after we approve the plat of something and there's an associated development agreement with it, that requires roads or sewer or water or storm sewer to be built, that developer typically has a 2-year limit in order to build that public infrastructure. Once that work is done, we issue a certificate of completion, and then that triggers a 1-year warranty on those public improvements to make sure that the road holds up, that we don't see any trench settlement and things like that in our new streets. After that 1-year warranty is done, the staff perform a warranty inspection and provide a punch list back to the developer, and they address any issues. And then we bring forward this resolution of acceptance, and that's where we're at with CAC's first edition. This subdivision had a lot longer than 2 years to complete its public infrastructure back when that development agreement was drafted. And but nonetheless, we've seen it through to completion, thanks to the developer's help, who's here tonight to speak to any questions you might have. But generally speaking, everything's in order. All the warranty items have been checked off, nothing left to be repaired. We'd be accepting all the infrastructure as described on this resolution of acceptance.
Thank you very much. I do see the developer here. You don't have to testify if you don't want to. If you want to, you sure can. Just identify yourself for the public. Just make sure the green button is on.
Better. My name is Steve Horning. I'm the president of CAC's Development. This is a real old map. If you look, every lot has been sold, and there's probably, on the lake, I think there's about 12 lots. There's at least 8 houses on there. And on the side, they've all been developed.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's a pretty old map, but.
Yeah.
Anything else, Tad?
Nope.
All right. Chair will entertain a motion to approve the resolution. Motion made by Councilman Peters, seconded by Councilman Danforth. Open it up for discussion. Councilman Shetty.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a question on these developments on this particular one. The testing we do, you say to certify this, make sure it's done right. As far as base and what's done before even the pavement is down, how do we know after it's paved and done? How do we know that the base was done correctly? I believe, years past, decades past, maybe there's been some challenges in some developments where maybe it wasn't quite done to spec, and we have some issues later on that we have to prematurely repair roads. So just curious what the process is to properly ensure that we've got the right base and just done correctly, because how do you know that after it's already been paved and everything? So,
Director Von Nye.
So to that question, Councilman, because of the progression of this subdivision, there are portions of some of these roads that the current staff have been able to be part of and witness the construction of and receive testing reports from. Unfortunately, there are older parts of this that the current staff weren't here for, but I would have to defer to Marcy or Justin if they have any knowledge on the amount of testing reports that were received from any of the older portions of roadway construction.
I can get out of here.
And if none, what we would do is, that's where that 1-year warranty and then plus the longevity we've already gotten for the several years of some of these streets that have been in place to where we just apply our knowledge based on what's in front of us to bring it forward for acceptance. But if you could, Marcy.
Marcy Lino, Engineering Department. So Heath's exactly right. These are older roads. So unless we did core samples and some density tests, which aren't conducive at this time, this one is older. We have longevity on it. It hasn't shown any out of normal wear and tear. So just watching it, and most of the roads now all have density tests going forward. These older subdivisions coming, we just watch the progression of it.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Questions, comments? All right, hearing none, the motion is to approve the resolution. All of those in favor will say aye, opposed nay. Manager, call the roll.
Peters?
Aye.
Shetty?
Aye.
Tupper? Bueller? Danforth? Holing?
Aye.
Jurens?
Aye.
Motion carries. We're on to item C, an approval of the purchase agreement for what is known as the Drake Land and as legally described in the purchase agreement, and for the city manager to take all actions necessary to effectuate and complete the purchase. City manager, Mac.
Thank you, Mayor. This purchase agreement is for land adjacent to the city land located on Highway 20. As previously discussed with members of the council, this would avoid certain extensions of street and avenue construction, which would provide cost savings to the city. The city council directed staff to negotiate with the Drakes for purchase of this land, which is immediately adjacent to the land we've identified for the street facility. There are several reasons why this is advantageous for us, but most importantly, it does negate the need to build out 11th and 9th Avenue, which leads to the street facility. Due to our subdivision regulations, the build-out of those roads would be required to provide access to the Drake lot if owned privately. City ownership of that lot negates the need to provide access. Purchase price is $135,000 cash from the city, with any remainder in purchase price of $315,000 to be donated by the Drakes. We are recommending approval of this purchase, and we'll stand by for any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the agreement. Motion made by Councilman Tupper, seconded by Councilman Jurens. We'll open it up for questions, comments, discussion. Councilman Danforth?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to open up a can of worms here. When this was presented to me, I had a list of concerns that, in my mind, justified us not making this acquisition. During that conversation, I interpreted that the 9th Avenue Road was required, and I'm going to use that word, required to be placed onto the site if we did not make this purchase. But that if we made the purchase, the road would not be required. Is that the understanding from?
City manager or Director Von Ay?
I'll defer the detailed discussions to our Public Works Director.
Director Von Ay?
Yes, that was indicated, correct.
Okay, thank you. So with that, knowing that it's required, I did not address my concerns because it didn't matter. My concerns didn't matter because the road's required. And in theory, if it's required, and maybe Mr. Von Ay can bring that number up, but if we had to put the road in, our portion was $240,000 or $50,000, I believe, something like that.
Yeah, I can.
Just roughly, rough number, I think. Let's just use that for purposes now. And so by buying the land for 135, we saved a pretty fair amount of money, and we got 4 acres of land. That's a really good deal from the city's standpoint. What I don't believe is correct is I don't believe that that road is required. I think it is probably an engineering or development standard that we use. And I didn't get it's a required but, because there's numerous instances where we have exceeded the length of a single access road into a property that we've allowed and continue to allow to be developed. A good example is the one that is leading off of Highway 212 all the way down to Cax Addition. There's one road in, there's one road out, okay? That's 30-some hundred feet, okay? Other examples of where we've done this is Marina Bay. That issue has come up in regards to some questions on some docks and stuff, but if you take the road from the South Lake Drive Road to the end of Marina Bay Road, it's about 950 feet, almost 1,000 feet. If you go to 19th Street, where you would turn to head off of Highway 212, and you would go to the Menards backyard, where you pick up your lumber or whatever you do back there, That's a dead-end road, but yet we've allowed development back there. That is, depending, if you go to the end of the road, it's about 1,600, almost 1,700 feet. If you go to where the last building is, it's almost 1,300 feet. Again, dead end. If you go behind Hy-Vee, the first road that heads, and I'm not sure what, it's 14th Street, I believe it is, and it comes off of that road that goes by Hy-Vee, and you head westward, it dead ends. That is 1,400 feet. So my question is it really isn't required, it's an engineering standard, a design standard that we use. My decision to support this purchase was purely on the fact that I interpreted that as I don't have a choice. None of those things I'm concerned about matter because we have to put that road in. And I would question if that is accurate. If it was an optional thing that, gee, it's a good standard to use, but we don't always do it, and we understood that, I would not have supported us moving this direction. And I don't know if anybody else interpreted it the same way I did, but I question that information as it relates to being a requirement and thus justifying the purchase of this land. We bought 27 or 28 acres. The current city street department plus the forestry department currently makes up combined about 6 to 6.5 acres of land. So we're over four times more the current land area with the land we already bought. Then now we're going to add 4 more acres. So I don't know if anybody else had that same understanding and made their decision. I think it's important that we understand, is it a requirement or is it an engineering standard? And it's up to you to make that determination whether that's important information or not. It was to me. Because at a time that we are diligently trying to make ends meet on a lot of projects that we have, I question why we would spend $135,000 when we already got more than enough land, and there was no real defined justification for it other than it was adjoining and available. That's where I'm at.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilman. Good question. So there was 3 different roads mentioned, the Cax, Marina Bay, Menards, that I listed, and then the question of, is this an option or a requirement? And then also engineering standards were mentioned. So I was wondering if you wanted to mention, or however you want to answer it, but one question that was interesting is, or that I had, is when were the engineering standards adopted?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Great point to make, and one that I was going to point out is, so yes, the length of a dead-end road or a cul-de-sac is administered a couple different ways. One is through our adopted building codes, and in Chapter 5, we adopt the ICC, the International Code Council's building codes, which include the IRC, International Residential Code, and the IBC, International Building Code, and then also the IFC, the International Fire Code. And in the IFC, for fire apparatus purposes, they restrict the limit of dead-end streets to 750, I believe it is, 750 feet. That then becomes a design standard as part of our engineering design standards that we administer, whether through the IFC or through the engineering design standards, the number's the same, but we limit the length of dead-end streets before they start to trigger the need for a secondary point of ingress or egress for fire apparatus issues and to ensure access for fire protection and emergency response. Reason being, if you get too long of a dead end and something happens to that long stretch of roadway where you can't get a fire truck to it or an ambulance to the end of that roadway, it's ideal to have that secondary point of ingress or egress in order to serve that particular area. So that's where the 750 comes from, and would say that all of our engineering design standards are requirements that we put on developers, and so we are pretty stringent on making sure we're adhering to them ourselves. The example cited happened well before the recent adoption of engineering design standards, which just happened 3 years ago, I believe, roughly. And so how or why some of those areas were allowed to build or construct or develop the way they did, I'd only is left for speculation on my part. But we do our part today to try to ensure that we are building to meet all those adopted design standards. Now, there can be exceptions to some of those situations. And I wanted to point out a couple factors on 11th here, if I could, that made sense in conjunction with our project. What initiated this whole discussion is these landowners came in and asked, hey, if somebody wanted to develop on here, are we going to be required to build this street out? Of course, the answer to that is yes. That's the orderly development that the city of Watertown administers on anybody that wants to improve their property and develop their property. They have to build the roads adjacent to it. We saw numerous examples tonight that talk to this effect. So under separate ownership, if somebody wants to develop on this lot in question here that we're looking at purchasing, that developer would have to build out their portion of 11th Street adjacent to their lot. Because this entire length of 11th exceeds that maximum dead-end length that's outlined in the International Fire Code, a would-be future 9th is then brought into play. And in looking at our site layout for the future street facility, we've got 10th locked in up here. This is actually the map from the 10th Avenue item earlier tonight where we approved the bid award for this. But we also had a potential alignment for 9th Avenue extension down here to tie into 11th. Until this discussion came into fruition about the availability of this land. What that we felt that did is then alleviates our need to fully construct 9th to a full city street section. Now, we acknowledge we're still going to need some form of paved access here to get onto the south side of our site, and that's how our architect is laying this out. But we don't need to build a full 40-foot wide curb and gutter street section anymore if we buy this and this parcel becomes part of ours. Reason being is that now this entire parcel has more than adequate frontage on a state highway, a public street. There's no need for that secondary access for 9th or this extension of 11th because of our access onto Highway 20 and 10th Avenue for that matter. And so it diminishes the needs that would have otherwise been triggered had this remained under separate ownership and separate development. I know, a long explanation, but I hope that helps cover some of the bases that were at question there.
Councilman Danforth, you are still recognized by the chair.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Again, maybe I'm the only one that interpreted requirement as it was, but Heath, the length of that road, the 10th Avenue extension, right, exceeds the 750 feet. Why is that allowable? And it's not down below where the extension of the 11th Avenue up to the city property line then would be roughly 840 feet.
Yeah, certainly. So some of the caveats to the dead-end street are providing appropriate turnaround for fire apparatus. One would include the cul-de-sac bulb that we have designed there on that, the radius at the end of 10th Avenue. I'm not sure what the exact length of this is, but exercising things of that nature are some of the ways to meet the requirements of the IFC and engineering design standards.
That's roughly 900 feet, just so you know that. But isn't it also, because we had this once on a proposed PUD, you know where Runnings is, and right across the road where they built those apartments, that was originally going to be a PUD. And the issue of, this issue of the depth of that lot was an issue. and I don't know if Mr. Rowland, Chief Rowland was involved in that or not, but what we discovered at the time was it doesn't have to be a road. It has to be an access area, a way to access it. And so there was a greenway area that could be used to get vehicles in there and get them turned around, that type of thing. Is that true here as well?
Director Von Nye?
I'm not certain I followed the question there, I apologize.
A secondary point of entry or ingress egress doesn't have to be a road. It's just got to have a means to get there, correct? I mean, so we're going to have all of our site built, right? And we're going to have open area there. Something could come across our property, or they could come through the Aero truck line, big parking lot, right, that goes back and abuts 11th. As long as there is a way to access that. Is that correct?
Yeah, I follow you now. I believe that could be an acceptable alternative. I defer to the fire chief on that, but I would also state that that would not be free and open public right-of-way that's unobstructed necessarily. You may have fencing or gates or buildings or things of that nature that could be privately blocked off and obstructing that access for that secondary means.
Chief Rowland, I see you in the back. You don't have to testify on anything if you don't want to, but if you can bring further illumination to this, or also the comparison about the that development of the condos, apartments across from Runnings.
You're talking about the ones across on 19th Street, Mike? Councilman Danforth?
That were proposed.
Yeah, we identified as a secondary road to that, but we were able to get them to give us that turnaround back there. So as long as Director Von Nye alluded to, as long as we have that secondary route of turnaround for our trucks, especially the ladder truck, which is the highest turnaround, then we're okay. In this particular case too, we have that option to do secondary into the parking lot. And with the cul-de-sac on the end of that on 10th Avenue, will be perfectly fine as well.
I have one question. I won't give the floor away from Councilman Danforth, but just in the place across from Runnings proposed, were we dealing with a situation of two different landowners or just one?
That was still one landowner.
Yeah, so it would be one landowner.
And that was like 4 years ago, 4 years ago, I believe?
Actually, that's not true. The property in question was one landowner, but the greenway area to the north is the area that was going to be acceptable for that secondary ingress egress.
But it would still be one landowner though, right?
Well, not the next property over, right?
No, he's
So it
correct.
does
Councilman
touch upon
Danforth's correct.
a second landowner.
Yeah, you're correct. You're
Not in-
correct.
Right? So what we could do, instead of building a whole road, or we could have a cul-de-sac required there,
Which we do on 10th Avenue.
okay? And it works fine for us there, but not on 9th.
And Councilman, just one further thing. So you're right, before our engineering standards were adopted, which was 3 years ago. So you could make the argument that you don't want the city to follow our own standards, which would have been applicable prior to them being adopted. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, you're not wrong in this instance.
Well,
You're definitely
it's-
right.
Here's the deal. It's a moot point if there's no other council members that have the same concern, okay? Because then the vote goes the way it goes. I misinterpreted, which without question stymied me from asking questions and bringing points up. And without a doubt, it had an impact on what I said I could support. And I'll just have to leave it at that. The rest, everybody else is going to have to make their determination as council. I think it's important that all of us as council members make darn sure that we understand what got us to a point of decision-making. And if there's any question at all, we need to revisit it, okay? And that's the purpose of me bringing this up, because I was under a different impression. And I might be the only one out of 7, and that's the way it is.
But, and I would just say something, Councilman, and to all the council. I hope no one ever feels, even if you're the only person on one side of an issue, I hope you never feel like you don't have the right to speak it up, represent the people who elected you, or to vote your conscience, because whether it's misinterpreted or however, it's like it doesn't matter, because if your belief, you were voted in here for a reason. So I want to respect that definitely, 100%. So Council City Manager Mack, you had something to say?
I just have a question of clarity, because I also want to make sure that I'm understanding. So based on the design standards and the engineering standards that have been adopted today, 9th would be required if the city were not the owner of that land.
So with certainty, at minimum, 11th would be required if this were developed under separate ownership, because the developer has to pay for the road in front of their lot. 9th would be a staff recommendation based on the development in this area as a secondary point of ingress and egress for the development that currently exists. Because of knowing the need for some level of access for us on our site, and knowing that this was going to be developed separately by another developer, you know, the logical connection here is that that extends over to Highway 20. We have access into our site. The extension here for this other separate development has also a point of secondary ingress and egress. If 9th weren't a part of our site, this probably wouldn't be a topic of discussion. But because it is, and because we want and need southerly access into our street facility, which is through this approach right here on Highway 20, those things all kind of meld together into the recommendation that we made in buying this parcel, absorbing it into ours. And I think for the money, the 135 grand for this 4 acres, it's money well spent, roads aside, to still allow this northerly triangle to develop as frontage along Highway 20 and interest along 10th, but also gives us some, you know, future room for growth for whether it be park and rec area that wants to expand over into here, additional stockpiling, which we tend to see grow year in and year out. But rather than creeping up into here past 10th and having to cross 10th, this made a good logical extension. So all these pieces put together are what steered us to the recommendation, pointing out the requirements of the secondary ingress egress, and absorbing this into our property, alleviating a lot of the street infrastructure needs.
Thank you. Councilman Shetty.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you for this conversation, Mike. I absolutely understand where you're coming from as far as, you know, that previous meeting when we talked about this. I too heard that, you know, that's what it was, something we needed to do. And basically, based off the answers tonight, it's still kind of pointing to that. I understand kind of working through the wordage of it, or how our current, how we currently work through this process. But for me, my reason for moving forward with this was the thought of having more land for potential growth for the street department, parks and rec, forestry. I just have a quick question on this. What's the total acres, not counting these acres we're talking tonight, what's the total acres of this purchase that we had?
27.
So 27. And then how much is the triangle, how many acres is that we're looking to sell off down the road?
There's roughly 12 up north and 15 retained in this rectangle.
Okay, so 15 acres is what we would have for use. Now, as a city grows, you know, as we are talking about a wastewater treatment plant, and or as far as, you know, the infrastructure that we're going to expand to maybe 35,000 people someday down the road, let's just say what if, having this property to be able to just have the room, you know, to be able to expand and grow. That's why I voted for it the last go around, was more for that reason. This road was the number game, the numbers on it. Yeah, I understand the numbers. How that comes into play too. There's a legitimate concern that Mike has there, and a reason for voting for or against it. But for me personally, it was this just having those extra acres to be able to do what we need for future growth.
City Manager Mack had something to say real quick.
Just as a point of clarification, no votes have been taken on this to date. We brought this to council as a contract, potential contract negotiation, and we've been given direction on how to move forward. The vote up or down will happen this evening.
Thank you for that correction.
Councilman Bueller?
Thank you. Just clarify for me, if you could, Director Von Eyck, if we did not purchase this property and we did not build those roads, would we be illegal in any fashion? Would we be breaking any laws, or is it just engineering standards that we've established by adopting the codes that we have?
Well, trying to answer that, the engineering codes we've adopted are laws that we need to administer is one point I'd make in that question. But if we did not purchase this, we're not responsible to build 11th at all. The city would not be. Whoever wanted to develop that 4-acre parcel would be responsible for 11th. The part that remains where we would administer our engineering design standards, that as if 11th were to get extended, it makes sense that 9th be connected to Highway 20. And that's what would then snowball effect into our involvement because we're adjacent to where 9th would be.
Follow up, Councilman?
Yes. So if we don't purchase this land, you're saying that we would absolutely have to build 9th? Is that correct? And that would be a burden to Aero Trucking because they would have to pay for some of that development, would they not?
Correct, they would.
Any further discussion? Would anyone like to speak before Councilman Danforth speaks a second time? Councilman Danforth.
Okay, thank you. So if I understand correctly, prior to the acceptance of the current standards that we're using, the IBC or whatever it's called and all those other acronyms, prior to the current standard that we're using, did I hear that that distance, that 750 feet, was a greater distance and it's been reduced, or do we even know what that number was? Because we have a new standard doesn't mean this changed. Correct?
Correct. Whether a standard was being administered is what I would question.
Okay.
Any further discussion, comments? Councilman Peters?
So once again, piggyback off of Councilman Bueller's comment, if we don't purchase the 4 acres, we would not be responsible to build out the north-south road there.
Correct.
But the east-west road, yes?
That would depend on what would develop here in the future. It's just, so this scenario, again, there's so many pieces of this puzzle that fit together. We control what develops here. We control the lack of the need to expand 11th. We control the lack of the need to build 9th, all by purchasing this. And the reduction in what would have been a full street section for both 11th and 9th in comparison to the purchase of this land, I think it was like an $80,000 net savings between the two, while still building a paved access, but not a full street section. So that's, even after the cost of land is figured in, we had about an $80,000 net savings.
So Director Von Eyck, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong or add on or subtract to my analogy, but to some extent what we're doing is we're buying an insurance policy, because at some point in the future, if anyone ever did want to do something back there and we didn't own it, they did, then we would be on the hook for our section of the road, and we would have no option at that point. This at least gives us the security to know that this won't happen.
Correct. We control the circumstances here.
Yeah.
By order of development of making this part of this lot that has adequate frontage on the State Highway Route 20.
Okay. Councilman Bueller?
Thank you, Mayor. Another question, Heath, if I might. If we decided not to purchase that property, we're saying that 9th would be developed, correct?
Yes, initially, city staff were planning on a full street section here for this future extension of 11th.
And then would Aero Trucking have a leg to stand on in any type of legal proceedings for that?
Yeah, anything's possible in the legal realm.
Well, that's a concern. I mean, I mean, that would be, to me, a terrible burden for them. I don't see where would be any added value to speak of for them.
Honestly, Councilman, that was one of the dilemmas staff had when we were contemplating the construction of 9th in order to accommodate a future extension of 11th, was just that, pulling the assessed cost for the south half onto Aero Trucking, who have frontage of Highway 20 already. I think statutorily, we would be okay in performing that assessment, but again, anybody can challenge anything in the legal realm, and I could see where they could do that if they had interest in it.
City Manager Mack, you had something? Councilman Peters?
So what is the timeline? If we're going to purchase this land, what's the timeline we need to put these roads in and get them done? And then two-part question, is this included in the budget for the street department, the road construction?
Timeline that we're really up against is really just 10th Avenue with our contract here for this lot for the Dollar General. The timeline for this area, this would become part of our site improvements for the new street facility. And so it'd be likely one of the last things constructed as we hopefully break ground early next year for the new street facility. We would have our whatever our paved access looks like, however it's designed on the site improvements, that would come in off of Highway 20 to serve our 19 acres down here. Portions of that might include some partial paving in this area too, where the right-of-way for 11th currently exists. But again, not to a full width, 40-foot wide curb and gutter street section. It would be more of a private access type of paving to the extent that we would want to construct. And then the answer to your last part there is yes, all these paving costs are incorporated in our estimates for the new street facility.
Any follow-up? Any further discussion, council? All right, the motion is to approve the purchase agreement. All those in favor will say aye, opposed say nay. City Manager, please call the roll.
Peters?
Aye.
Shetty?
Aye.
Tupper? Bueller? Danforth?
Nay.
Pauline?
Aye.
Jurens?
Aye.
Motion carries. We are now on to City Council member announcements and introduction of topics for future discussion. Any announcements? Topics for future discussion? City Manager report?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of quick things. A reminder that our next meeting will be held on Tuesday, September 5th, as the 4th is Labor Day. And then we will have a work session on September 11th at 4 p.m.
All right, thank you very much. We have no reason to go into executive session, therefore the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn. Second. Motion made by Councilman Tupper, seconded by Councilman Bueller. Any discussion on that? Hearing none, the motion is to adjourn. All those in favor will please say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. Motion carries. Good night and God bless you, Watertown.